Some time ago, I discussed how Ubisoft will be executing a change in direction going forward when it comes to storytelling. They said, simply put, that they will not be doing linear storylines so much anymore, and that is paraphrasing, of course. And these comments came from the Ubisoft Chief Creative Officer Sergei Hesko, who said, quote, "When there are cutscenes in a game, it bothers me because it removes my ability for expression. During these scenes, I'm not doing what I want to do, which is evolve in this world. I don't want us to write one story. I want to be tens of thousands of stories, that each character has one and I can speak to them if I want to know that story." Now, while this cutscene sounds great in theory, at the time I was skeptical of this as I was concerned about a lack of direction and other things that are like an albatross around the neck of so-called non-linear storylines. But I've been pondering on this a bit more, and I want to talk a bit more in detail about this. First of all, I want to help shed some negativity surrounding the word linear and talk a bit more about my concerns and linear versus non-linear storytelling. This isn't really about Ubisoft in particular, although I will be touching on them as well, of course, at the end. Just more in general. So let's talk about the first thing. Unfortunately, the word linear has some very negative connotations in a lot of people's minds, including my own, thanks to a trend which persisted for far too long. The term linear was associated with corridor shooters and being led, sometimes literally by the hand, through a series of set pieces. These types of games were all but on rails, and sometimes you can even open doors by yourself. So be honest, when you think of linear games, online alongside actual good games, you most likely are thinking of the most egregious examples of corridor shooters that plagued our industry like an incredibly boring disease. But that's a bit unfair in old linear. To use a very recent example, Dishonored 2 is a linear game. While the environments have a lot of exploration and there are a ton of extra things to discover and routes to your objective, the story takes place in a linear way. While the details may change based upon your route and non-lethal or lethal method, the story remains the same. Many of the best games from recent years can be described as linear in terms of story, even if they have open worlds or non-linear gameplay styles. So with that, let's move on to Ubisoft's plan for a non-linear approach. Firstly, I will say that I too find a cutscene heavy approach frustrating, and much prefer that storytelling also take place in the world through background storytelling, lore, overheard conversations and items you pick up, as well as through non-interactive scenes. But while it is tough to know exactly how Sergei's dream will be implemented, I am quite concerned. Narratives and the way they are told, usually through linear means, have given us some of the best experiences in recent memory. The Last of Us, Inside, Doom, Tomb Raider, and even older games like the original Prince of Persia trilogy. Non-linear immediately makes me worried about the lack of direction and lack of meaningful decisions for the player. Let's look at the best known series for branching storylines, which is one way of doing a slightly more non-linear story, and that is Mass Effect. When you finally reach the end of that trilogy, did it actually feel like you had any choice at all, any impact on the world? The answer is probably no. But that comes down to it being wide in the middle, where it starts off from a single path at the start, widens out in the middle as you have many different paths to choose from, but in the end there is still only one path and all the different routes you took simply led you back to there. But let's say you go another route. Instead of this wide in the middle strategy, you go for a story which has many paths and many destinations. How far this can go can depend. For example, Silent Hill 2 technically has many destinations as it has multiple endings based upon your actions in the game, but the story and places you visit throughout the game will pretty much be the same and be the same order. But you could also employ another method which would require multiple playthroughs of a shorter narrative. We have seen several games employ this recently, where each attempt from the player gives the player and the player character a chance to learn more about the world and its characters before finally having learned enough and done enough to change the ending for the better. As with everything storytelling, there are almost infinite amount of ways to take on a story, and none of them are strictly bad, but they all do depend on their execution. However, I do feel there's an inherent risk for Ubisoft in taking on a non-linear storytelling method, especially when Sergei is talking about tens of thousands of stories. This can result in even more of what is not so funnily called the Ubisoft bloat, where there is a huge amount of content but a lot of it has no meaning and is there just as filler. This huge amount of bloat content can leave a game feeling like it lacks direction and drive, and also potentially take away meaning from the story and the characters. Learning more about the background of other characters in the game is definitely something I can get behind and something that can help our world feel more realised, but it sounds as if Ubisoft wants to change narrative, the main narrative of course, with this as well. But again, it all depends on the execution. But given Ubisoft's love for bloats, let's just say I'm a bit concerned about the future of, say, Assassin's Creed. And Assassin's Creed, where I'm not being bombarded with cutscenes, sounds great in theory, but one of the great things about the older games in the AC universe is the story and the world, so I just really hope they don't overdo it. But perhaps I'm extrapolating too much from Sergei's words here. It's entirely possible that we will still be getting a linear narrative, but we'll be getting more stories told alongside that linear narrative. I don't just mean flash-in-the-pan side quests, this could also be meaningful quests with the main but not playable characters, or even just overhearing conversations between main characters and even minor NPCs that could give life to the world, and even give a different path option for the narrative. Now, this is something that Dishonored 2 actually does quite well. Sometimes when you listen to the conversation between the guards or other such people, you can get a chance at either a different approach to the mission or sometimes a side objective. Now, of course, the mission remains the same, but perhaps you learned of a different route, or hey, there's a secret treasure hidden away in this place, that kind of thing. We could also be dealing with a more organic approach, rather than dick about with side quests and come back to the main quest to trigger the cutscene and continue on the narrative path. If so, great. But again, I do feel that a non-linear narrative does hold more inherent risk, especially within an open world setting. Open world games are already in danger of having a lack of agency surrounding the main quest, because that person you have to rescue will still be alive and in need of rescuing even if you spend 300 hours building a settlement. Having a character that can be led down multiple paths are also in danger of lacking any real substance as a character if the player can take them down multiple paths and essentially mould their personalities to their liking, and then of course you have a story that has to fit that and you end up with something that's fairly watered down. Or you could have multiple paths that don't deviate from what this person would do and risk having not much difference between the multiple options. Now, of course, there are games that have done more non-linear storytelling in open worlds well. I'm sure you're all thinking of The Witcher 3, so it can absolutely be done. And I don't want to seem like I'm quote-unquote hating, dislike that word, but hey-ho, on non-linear stories here. As a writer and creator myself, I want to see different types of stories told in different ways, and different types of games in which to explore those stories. I love non-linear stories, I find them really enjoyable, it's a different approach, but I do feel that linear storytelling lends itself to a stronger narrative. And again, that quote 10,000 stories and Ubi's love for bloat does make me a bit concerned they might go too far in the other direction. But you've heard me waffle for almost 10 minutes now. I'd love to hear your thoughts. I know this is not really a criticism of Ubisoft, this is more a general discussion of non-linear versus linear narratives, kind of sandwiched around the general comments from Ubisoft there. But again, as a writer and a creator, I very much enjoy talking about this type of stuff. I mean, if you've been with this channel pretty much since the beginning, you may recall that I used to do these types of videos, like things that make a good character, things that make a good horror game, things that make a good blah. And this particular video kind of marks their return, to be honest. I feel like I've grown enough as a creator, I've experienced enough different stories now that I can really tackle those topics as and when they come up. So, you've heard me talk about this for a while. I want to see your thoughts on this. Let me know. As always, thank you very much for watching, and do remember to like and subscribe. It does help out a great deal and is very much appreciated. I'll see you next time.